Genitourinary tuberculosis is a disease of usually insidious onset. It can present with many different ways, usually non-specific, and it's very, very difficult to diagnose this genitourinary tuberculosis unless you keep a very high index of suspicion. Some of the patients present with infertility, especially in the countries like India, where tuberculosis is quite common. It is one of the commonest causes of female infertility, to the tune of 10 to 20% of infertility. It can present as male infertility as well. It can present as chronic pelvic pain or dysmenorrhea or different types of menstrual disturbances. It can present as bladder dysfunction. It can present as recurrent UTI. And when you evaluate for the UTI, there will be sterile pyuria, means you cannot get a culture positive report. So in those sort of cases, you have to look for tuberculosis of the urogenital tract. And some of these patients can present with renal failure as well. So statistics from India shows the 4% of extrapulmonary tuberculosis in India is possibly genitourinary tuberculosis. And this figure is actually a little less than what is being seen, what is being suspected in clinical practice, probably because of underdiagnosis and sometimes underreporting as well. In 15 to 20% of cases, there is concomitant pulmonary and genitourinary tuberculosis. And the mean age of presentation is 40 years. Up to 50% of these patients have radiological evidence of past infection. So 15% have evidence of active pulmonary infection along with GUTB, and 50% have radiological evidence of past infection as well. There are three types of genitourinary tuberculosis. Urinary tuberculosis means tuberculosis of the collecting system of the kidney and rarely renal parenchymal. It could be tuberculosis of the female genital tract, or it could be tuberculosis of the male genital tract. First, I'll deal with urinary tuberculosis. Pathogenesis, classically, it is bloodstream, hematogenous spread to the kidney from the lymph node or from the lung, with involvement of renal, pelvis, ureter, and bladder. Usually unilateral, and less than 10% of the cases are bilateral. Uncommonly, it can present as interstitial nephritis, glomerulonephritis, and amyloidosis. And in interstitial nephritis, sometimes you cannot isolate organism from the renal tissue, and sometimes it is just like an immune reaction to the bacilli, which is located in the pulmonary, means in the lung. So pulmonary tuberculosis with secondary allergic or immune based interstitial nephritis. So this slide shows the pathogenesis of tuberculosis involving the urinary tract. So from the Ghon focus, that is primary complex, the bacilli can remain dormant for many years, maybe 10 to 15 years or so. From there, it enters a thoracic duct, through which it enters the systemic circulation, reaches the kidney. Inside the kidney, it gets trapped in the glomerular capillaries. And once it is localized in the renal cortex, it can again remain inactive for many years, maybe 5 to 10 years or so. And sometimes it can get healed also. And if it is not healed and is active, there will be a rupture of this cortical granuloma, and this bacilli will be liberated, which will reach as a loop of Henle. And inside the loop of Henle, it will localize. Why this is localized in the loop of Henle is because of the specific tonicity. There is hypertonicity of the plasma here, reduced blood flow here, and increased ammonia level. All these three factors reduces the immunogenic mechanism, immunogenic defense mechanism. So it will localize here. It can either form an abscess or become ulcer. If the abscess gets broken down, it will rupture into the collecting system, which is a different part of the collecting system like ureter, bladder, etc. If the ulcer breaks open, this bacilli will be liberated into the urine. So bacilluria. This is the commonest pathogenic mechanisms of urinary tuberculosis. How will you stage urinary tuberculosis? Stage 1 to stage 4. Stage 1 is non-destructive form, tuberculosis of the renal parenchyma. Stage 2 is small destructive form or tuberculous papillaritis, minimal affection of the collecting system of the kidney. Stage 3 is a destructive form with 2 to 3 cavernous tuberculosis. And stage 4 is widespread destructive form, polycavernous renal tuberculosis. And when this tubercle bacilli invade bladder, it can produce hyperemia and ulceration of the bladder mucosa with a distortion of the uretrovesical junction. The junction between the urethra and the urinary bladder gets distorted, and there will be lateral displacement and enlargement of ureteric orifice, which is classically described as golf hole ureter. It can get ulcerated in the bladder mucosa, involving all layers of bladder, producing pancystitis. And if at this stage it is untreated, there can be fibrosis of the urinary bladder with concomitant contracture, and the long-term sequelae is thimble bladder. And when it involves the ureter, the basic pathology is inflammation with fibrosis. So that leads to segmental strictures of different segments of ureter, and classically in the distal third of ureter. And there can be segmented dilatation as well, and this is classically described as corkscrew ureter. And after many years, this ureter become aperistaltic, just like a tube. It will become a rigid ureter, which is known as pipe-stem ureter. Here you can see this ureteric strictures at different levels. And if the renal involvement, once the patient is infected with tubercular bacilli in the kidney, and if unattended or untreated, and if the disease is active for many years, finally that kidney gets damaged, and the whole tissue is replaced by dystrophic calcified tissue, which is known as putty kidney or cement kidney. The important thing about putty kidney or cement kidney is that even at this stage, this tubercle bacilli will remain viable. So the commonest clinical presentation of patients presenting with urinary tuberculosis is just like urinary tract infection, but not responding to conventional antibiotics, and repeated cultures are negative. So any patient with lower urinary tract symptoms, frequency, urgency, nocturia, associated with dysuria or hematuria for at least 2 weeks, and not responded to 1 week course of appropriate antibiotics. Appropriate means commonly used antibiotics as per the usual culture sensitive pattern of that particular hospital, if it is being used, and the patient is not responding. And some patients have systemic symptoms like fever, weight loss, and night sweats. And normally for a urinary tract infection also, if only bladder is involved, there will not be fever also. So even without this systemic signs or symptoms, the bladder symptoms are there, and if it persists after a course of antibiotic therapy, you have to evaluate for urinary tuberculosis. Since UTI is very common in clinical practice, one important point I would like to mention is the fluoroquinolones should be of restricted use in the treatment of UTI. Most of the physicians use these fluoroquinolones, ciprofloxacin or norfloxacin, in the treatment of UTI, and most of the time they get away with it. The problem with fluoroquinolone is that it will reduce the sensitivity of subsequent tests for Mycobacterium tuberculosis in the urinary tract and should be avoided. And the two indications for the use of quinolones in a setting of UTI is, one is prostatitis. In the setting of prostatitis, since the penetration of quinolones is quite high to the prostate, that is a first line drug for the treatment of prostate. And second thing is, all the other antibiotics are resistant, then you can use quinolones. Otherwise, empirical treatment with quinolones should be avoided as far as possible. Then how will you evaluate for a patient who is presenting with such symptoms? X-ray test and retro testing is mandatory for all patients presenting with a suspected case of urinary tuberculosis, because as mentioned in the previous slides, 50% of patients will be having past evidence of tuberculosis, and maybe 10 to 15% will be having active infection of the lung. Retro testing should be done in all cases, because all sort of extrapulmonary tuberculosis, HIV positivity is a common accompaniment, and the treatment duration also is prolonged for this HIV positive patients, and the monitoring also is little different. Renal function should be monitored for all, because this tuberculosis of the urinary system as such can produce renal failure, and these patients with chronic kidney disease are prone for developing genitourinary tuberculosis. And one more thing is, a patient with the CKD, chronic kidney disease, at the later stages, like when the patient is having severe renal failure, creatinine clearance less than 30 ml per minute, some of the drugs used in the treatment of tuberculosis should be modified in the dose, like ethambutol and pyrazinamide. And sometimes there will be superadded bacterial infection along with tuberculosis of the urinary tract. So all these patients should be subjected to routine culture, routine microscopy and culture for pyogenic organisms. And to diagnose tuberculosis, the early morning urine samples, 3 to 5 specimens should be taken, and all this should be sent for microbiology culture, then AFP stain, and along with that you have to do the drugs susceptibility testing as well. Since this anatomical abnormalities due to tuberculosis of the urinary tract is quite common, all these patients should be subjected to ultrasound KV also to look whether the patient is having hydronephrosis or not. If the patient is having hydronephrosis, poor drainage, and suppose the patient is having renal failure, you have to immediately decompress the kidney by doing some drainage procedures like percutaneous nephrostomy or DJ stenting, uretery stenting. Intravenous pyelogram or intravenous urogram is required in selected cases to look for the anatomy, like the changes in the ureter, changes in the bladder. All these things are better delineated by all the changes in the collecting system are better delineated by IVP. The problem is early changes will be missed, and another problem is the chance of contrast nephropathy is high if you use intravenous urography. Contrast CT, it is better than IV urogram in terms of ability to pick up the early lesions of the urinary system. Here again, the problem is contrast-induced nephropathy, and the chance of contrast nephropathy is higher compared to IVU, because the amount of contrast used here is much higher than the amount used in IVU. MR urogram without contrast is a better choice, but this investigation is not easily available. So if it is available, this can replace IVP or contrast enhanced CT. And the advantage of this MR urogram is it can be used in pregnant women, children, and patients with pre-existing renal function, renal failure also. You can use this MR urogram since you are not using contrast. When the accessible tissue is there, like once a collection is there behind the ureter or some space like behind the kidney or so, if this collection is there or a suspected mass is there in the bladder, you can do FNAC of the lesion and send for AFP staining, culture, and cytology, which can confirm the diagnosis of tuberculosis. In selected cases, you can subject the patient for URS, urethrocytoscopy, with or without bladder biopsy. The advantage is you can directly visualize the bladder mucosa. So any abnormalities you can directly pick up, like the changes in the bladder wall or the bladder, the urethrovesical junction and all, you can easily pick up by doing this urethrocytoscopy, and you can take a biopsy from the sample from the abdominal area, and that can be subjected for the ASP, the AFP, culture, cytology, etc. And when biopsy accessible sites is there, you have to take biopsy and subject for the culture, that is histopathology, culture, and AFP stain. Obviously, the aim of treatment should be to achieve TB cure. Since the anti-tuberculous drugs achieve very good concentration in the urine, more than 90% of patients achieve TB cure. Yes. In means in a patient who is having the, if you use a sensitive, means there is no evidence of rifampicin or INH resistance, definitely the cure rate is much, much higher. And second important aim of treatment should be to prevent long-term sequelae. So to prevent long-term sequelae, you have to institute the treatment as early as possible. Third is to restore normal anatomy if it has been distorted. Here comes the surgical option, like the changes in the anatomy of the ureter, bladder, etc. should be corrected. I think the pharmacotherapy will be discussed by the next speaker. I'll just go into the surgical part, just 1 or 2 words. One is, suppose the patient is having partial or impending ureteral stricture diagnosed, and suppose the patient is having renal failure, you have to immediately relieve the obstruction. First, you try ureteric stenting. You can put a stent, double J stent, DJ stent, insert into the renal pelvis through the per urethra method. It should reach the renal pelvis, and ideally that should be kept for 6 to 12 months. If it is in place, that should be kept for 6 to 12 months, because even during treatment of tuberculosis with anti-tuberculous drugs, even during the healing phase, there can be stricture formation happening. So if you do this stenting and if you remove after 2-3 weeks, again, the patient can develop stricture, which can worsen the clinical situation. So you have to keep this stenting for 6 to 12 months. And if in some cases, you may not be able to do this stenting, it may not be accessible. The stent may not pass into the renal pelvis. In such cases, you can do percutaneous nephrostomy. And there are some other surgical interventions required, like reconstructive procedures, repeat multiple strictures of the ureter, which has to be corrected. But apart from this emergency procedures like percutaneous nephrostomy and this DJ stenting, other surgical procedures should be reserved in the later half of treatment. Like you should wait till the last 4 weeks of treatment, anti-tuberculosis treatment. Then you can try for the other reconstructive procedures. If the small bladder is the problem, you can do bladder augmentation surgery. If the ureteric stricture is there, you can dilate the strictures, or you can do some reconstructive surgeries there. Sometimes you have to do nephrectomy of that particular kidney. The indication is a patient who is having a damaged kidney due to tuberculosis with hypertension, not controlled by drugs, or if the patient is having severe pain, chronic pain, or if the patient is having nephrocutaneous fistula, which is not at all healing. These are the situations where you need nephrectomy of that particular kidney. The advantage of doing nephrectomy is that the relapse rate is very, very low. So if you give treatment with anti-tuberculosis drugs and if you do nephrectomy, the chance of this relapse rate is less than 1%. Now coming to the second part of my talk, tuberculosis of the female genital tract. Like urinary tuberculosis, the spread is hematogenous. Here, instead of lymph node, spread is hematogenous spread from the lungs. Less common is lymphatic spread from the abdominal organs, and most common site of affection is fallopian tubes. When the female genital TB is there, more than 90% of cases affect fallopian tubes. From there, reaches endometrium and ovaries. Generally, it spares myometrium, but rarely, less than 2% of cases will be having involvement of myometrium as well. Clinical presentation of this female genital tuberculosis also is vague. The most common presentation is implantation failure or infertility, primary infertility. And sometimes ectopic pregnancy also can have presentation when the affection is of the fallopian tubes. When the endometrium is affected, the patient can present with dysmenorrhea, amenorrhea, or menorrhagia. When cervix is affected, there can be postcoital bleeding. When the vulva is affected, there can be bloodstained discharge. Sometimes it can present with tubo-ovarian mass if it affects ovary. So any premenopausal woman presenting with infertility, and the common causes are ruled out, like hypothyroidism and all is ruled out, or a lady presenting with the menstrual problem, and obvious cause of this menstrual abnormality is not there, or a patient, premenopausal lady presenting with unexplained abdominal pain or pelvic mass. So these patients should be looked for the diagnosis of female genital TB and evaluated. Though this postmenopausal female genital TB is rare, any postmenopausal woman presenting with vaginal bleeding should be evaluated for female genital TB as well. So it is one of the differential diagnoses of postmenopausal bleeding. So as in other forms of like male genital TB or urinary TB, here also these two tests are mandatory, HIV test and X-ray test. The reason is already mentioned. Any patient presenting with symptoms like already mentioned symptoms, and in the childbearing age, you have to do pregnancy test, because if the pregnancy test is positive, you have to avoid unnecessary investigation. Unnecessary means radiological investigations with exposure to fetus should be avoided. Hysterosalpingogram is not indicated as a routine diagnostic modality of genitourinary tuberculosis, because by doing this test there can be some complications like dissemination of tuberculosis and all can happen, but usually as a part of infertility evaluation, hysterosalpingogram is being performed. And there are some abnormalities which I'll be discussing shortly. And some of these patients will be having normal hysterosalpingogram. CT pelvis or MRI to rule out any mass or other abnormalities. Then PET-CT to detect, again, the hotspots. Active lesions can be picked up by PET-CT, but you cannot differentiate this PET-CT, this malignancy from tuberculosis by doing PET-CT. Only thing is you can find out whether the lesion is active or not. Then endometric aspirate can be done as and when possible. Endometric aspirate should be done, and this aspirate should be sent for AFP, culture, and drug susceptibility testing. Laparoscopy. Laparoscopy is a part of usual evaluation for infertility. During laparoscopy, what is the indication for laparoscopy is when other less invasive tests are inconclusive, when you suspect malignancy, or a part of infertility investigations. So some of the findings which can be seen in hysterosalpingogram are, you expect fallopian tube obstruction or constriction, because that's the commonest site of affection of female genitourinary tuberculosis, fallopian tube, and or uterine cavity adhesion or deformity, and to the maximum it can produce Asherman's syndrome. That's a total uterine cavity block. Then signs specific for tuberculosis are cotton wool pluck, pipe stem tube, golf club tube, cobblestone tube, beaded tube, leopard skin tube. And some changes in the uterus are collar stud abscess, T-shaped uterus, and pseudo unicornate uterus. Laparoscopic appearance specific for tuberculosis are tubercles on the surface, fimbrial block, fimbrial phimosis, tubal bleeding, peritubal adhesions, tubo-ovarian mass, rigid tubes, etc. And when you are suspecting when you have a very strong suspicion of this tuberculosis, you have to do endometrial or fallopian tube biopsy, and this tissue can be sent for histopathology and culture. And finally, culture of menstrual fluid also can yield positive results in some cases. Diagnosis of the female genital TB is made when one of the following is there. One is laparoscopic appearance typical of female genitourinary tuberculosis. Any gynecological specimen positive for AFP on microscopy or positive for Mycobacterium tuberculosis on culture, or any gynecological specimen with findings consistent with TB on histopathological examination, like caseating necrosis or this giant cell granulomas. Treatment, again for 6 months. The surgical treatment is not part of primary treatment of female genitourinary tuberculosis, and sometimes to restore the normal anatomy of the fallopian tube, you have to do surgical intervention but even if this tubal anatomy is restored for an infertility patient, even with ATT as well as by surgical treatment, this fertility may not come back, and this fertility after treatment of this tuberculosis with ATT and surgery is less than 20%, and even this 20%, only 7% will reach the successful pregnancy, successful delivery, because premature delivery and other complications can happen in between. Now coming to my last part of my discussion, male genital tract tuberculosis. Tuberculosis can affect the entire male genital tract, prostate, seminal vesicles, epididymis, vasculature, testicles, and penis. But can be heterogeneous to prostate and epididymis or via the urinary tract. So normally heterogeneous route to the prostate. The commonest site of affection of the male genital tract is epididymitis. More than 50% of cases, epididymis is involved. In 50% of these cases, patient will present with a scrotal nodule or epididymal hardening. 50% have scrotal fistula and hydrocele in some rare cases. So any patient who presents with scrotal pain or swelling for 2 weeks or more and not responding to 2 weeks course of antibiotics, or any patient who presents with a discharging sinus in the scrotum should be looked for male genital tuberculosis. So diagnostic algorithm, the test will be, the initial test will be same as that of female genital TB, like X-ray test, HIV, etc. But one important thing is male genital tuberculosis is usually associated with involvement of coexistent renal TB as well, because there is a connection between this prostate and other structures. So all these patients renal function test is mandatory. Non-mycobacterial organism urine culture and microscopy should be done. Early morning urine sample for this thing should be done. Ultrasound of kidney, ureter, and bladder should be done. And for this particular condition, ultrasound scan of the scrotum should be done to evaluate the swelling or mass lesion in the scrotum. Epididymal mass, if it is there, you can do FNAC and subject that specimen for staining, culture and sensitivity, and cytology. Biopsy in selected cases. When a mass is there, you can take the specimen and send for staining, culture, and histopathology. Treatment is for 6 months. And generally, surgery is not at all an option for the treatment of male genital tuberculosis. Epididymolectomy may be required if there is a caseating abscess, and this abscess persists despite after 6 months of anti-tuberculosis treatment. If it persists, then you can do this surgical treatment. Now, I just want to put a word on the recommendation for the use of this gene expert for the diagnosis of extrapulmonary tuberculosis. So, as mentioned in the initial talk itself, it has mentioned that gene expert is recommended as a diagnostic modality in 3 types of extrapulmonary tuberculosis only, like lymph node tuberculosis, CNS tuberculosis, and I think pleural tuberculosis. Though this it is being recommended, I think I have seen some literature where it has mentioned that WHO recommends the use of gene expert for the diagnosis of genitourinary tuberculosis as well. But various other articles have shown that, and meta-analysis of some of the articles has also mentioned that gene expert may not be a good option for the time being, because lot of false positive results are being encountered. So as of now, I think it is not the time to recommend the routine use of gene expert for the diagnosis of genitourinary tuberculosis. So to conclude, genitourinary tuberculosis is one of the commoner forms of extrapulmonary tuberculosis. A high index of suspicion is needed to make a diagnosis, and early initiation of treatment is needed, because if you are delaying treatment, it can lead to irreversible damage. Thank you all for the patient hearing.